Welcome to the Postpartum is Forever podcast. My name is Katura Stoltenberg. I am a mother of 2 young men and a postpartum doula. This podcast is dedicated to all mothers and is a place to hear honest, relatable conversations with the intention of helping mothers feel seen, heard, supported, and valued. I believe that postpartum is forever and that sharing our stories is a powerful way that we facilitate connection with ourselves, our children, and our community. Thank you for being here. Today I speak with Julia Jones, the founding director and lead educator at Newborn Mothers, which is a global postpartum education business. Julia has worked in postpartum care for 15 years and has trained thousands of postpartum professionals in over 60 countries. Julia has written a best-selling book called Newborn Mothers: When a Baby is Born, So is a Mother. She provides postnatal education to the world so that parents receive the respect and reverence they deserve. She is committed to postnatal education that is both based on scientific evidence and cultural care, and is dedicated to advocacy for publicly funded postpartum care. Julia lives by the beach in Fremantle, Western Australia, with her family and 3 chickens, and she's obsessed with tea. It's got to be loose tea, strong, and served in a teapot. Her favourite thing to do on the weekends is hike on the Bibulan track. Enjoy the episode. I'm really thrilled to have you on the podcast, Julia Jones. Thank you for being here.
I'm very happy to be here, Katura.
That's great. I just wanted to start off by asking you a little bit of your journey before you became a mother.
Yes, so I'm actually a little bit unusual because I became a postpartum doula before I was a mother. Most people, the catalyst to step into postpartum care is their own experience, unfortunately, usually negative, that makes them want to support other women. Some people have really positive postpartum experiences, and that's what makes them go like, oh, I want everyone to feel like this. But for me, I was actually, after I went to university, I was traveling and volunteering overseas. And I was in India at the time, and I just saw how differently women and mothers and babies were revered and respected by their community. And I just realized that we were doing something wrong. I'd studied social justice and I was really interested in human rights and particularly women's rights. And this just seemed to be an area where it all just fell apart for women, that you could sort of like pretend we had equality until you had a baby, and then suddenly like no status, no job, it just would reduce equality so much. And then I started learning about Ayurvedic postpartum care, which is traditional Indian medicine. And then as the years went on, I learned more and more about different cultures. And I realized that they do postpartum care in China. They have postpartum care, in fact, all over the world, including in my own European ancestry and the Indigenous people where I live in Fremantle in Western Australia. And I kind of realized that actually this is like a universal cultural support that's provided for mums, and that we are the unusual ones, that we aren't providing this. And that's kind of what made me kind of really want to do this.
Yeah, we think we're so progressive here, aren't we? But as you said, once it comes to motherhood, some of the cultures that perhaps we think are a bit primitive are way ahead of us.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And were you interested in looking in exploring postpartum care or how mothers were treated, or is it just something that you just noticed and became interested in?
It was just something that I noticed. When I was at uni, I didn't really know what I would end up doing. I actually wanted to work for the United Nations. I thought I'd work somehow in like big picture human rights policy change stuff. And then, yeah, that was kind of just a bit of a turning point for me, realizing that this was actually what was needed. And that even though women's rights have come a long way, mothers' rights have still not at all been incorporated into that movement. The only way a mother can kind of succeed in life is by pretending she's not a mother, by acting as though she's not a mother.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. So how did you then sort of move forward into this work of working with mothers? It was before you had your children, I'm hearing.
Yeah, so I didn't start my business before I had children, but I did do some training, and I had my first few prac clients. So the training that I did meant that I had to go and do a few supervised clients for free, as part of that learning experience. And then it was when I did have my own baby, and I kind of thought I'd have a head start on other mums because I knew a little bit about cooking, and I knew a little bit about belly binding, and I knew a little bit about massage. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to find this so easy becoming a mum. And it was a really difficult experience. It was one of the hardest times in my life. And I was like, okay, I really got to get serious about solving this problem. Like a little bit of cooking is nice, but that's not really getting to the heart of the matter. And that's when I started my business. I quit my day job, and I really threw myself into not just postpartum doula training, but also things like anthropology and neuroscience and biology and evolution, and looking at all of these things about how our brains and bodies were built, and how we were designed. And that was when I was really like, oh, this is big. Like, this cultural care is, I mean, cooking's great, but that's kind of like the reason we need to do the cooking was what was missing. It wasn't just like make a meal because that's a nice thing to do. It was like, no, because this is like such a critical moment in a mother's life, and it can change the trajectory of her life and her baby's life. And so that was when I kind of really started to pull all the pieces together. And so I started working as a postpartum doula. And I did that for about 5 years. And then people started asking me, how do I learn what you learn? And I'd like cobbled together all these bits of research and seminars, professional development days. I brought a trainer over from Canada because there was no training in my town. And so when people started asking me, how do you do what you do? And I was like, I don't know, it's kind of hard to learn this stuff. And that's when I started teaching.
Amazing. We're so glad that you did. Because as you've beautifully expressed, it's not just, I think we sort of might think of our postpartum in terms of one thing, like one compartment. So maybe we think, okay, we'll fill our freezer because that seems like a really good thing to do. Or my husband will take paternity leave for 2 weeks and that'll sort it all out. That'll cover it. But we don't think that there are so many dimensions and factors towards making it a postpartum that allows us to actually find joy in it, and not just endure it and get through it and survive it.
Yes, and to be a different person at the end of it. I mean, I think that's where so many people, including myself, are really naive in our culture, because we're like, oh, I'm just going to have a baby and then I'll still be me. No, you won't. Everything about your brain will change. Everything about your worldview, your body, the things that you think are important, everything will change. And so rather than kind of going like, oh, I'm not going to be one of those mums who, no, you are.
Yeah.
So it's better to support that as a rite of passage. This will change your relationships. It will change your work. It will change whether or not you can watch the news without crying, like it changes everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of mothers, I think, find that very scary. And that's why they don't. I've been talking about this for quite some time, and I'm going to continue talking about the fact that we will change. It's not, oh, some people change, but I won't. We will change, but also getting the message across, it's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean the end of our life. It doesn't mean the end of the person that we always thought that we were, or that now we're not going to be able to do. I think we see it as something like a downgrade, like we're no longer going to resemble any part of ourselves, and we're going to be just a mum, and it's going to affect our ability and capacity to do anything outside of that. But yeah, the more that we can talk about the fact that the changes are really hopeful and really encouraging, I think that might flip the dialogue around this subject.
I think you're totally right, because of living in this patriarchal world that values traditionally masculine traits. We don't think that becoming more intuitive or becoming better at reading nonverbal cues is an important thing or a valid thing, but there are many things that we become better at that are scientifically studied. As mothers, we're better at assessing risk. We become more ambitious. There's so many things that we become better at. We're better at multitasking. All mums know that they're better at multitasking than they used to be, and probably than their husbands. And so these are this is both biological changes that just happen by the very fact of being pregnant and breastfeeding. And they're also cultural changes that happen from the massive learning curve of becoming a parent. And so even non-biological parents will experience some of these changes because they're both biological and cultural, environmental as well. And so rather than saying, I won't change, it's better to go, how can I be supported in this change? What kind of rites of passage do I need, and what kind of celebration, and how do I manage my grief? How do I move through not being, because it is sad and it is a bit scary, but again, there are changes in our lives when our brains become more plastic, and that happens in infancy, in the first year or two of our lives. It happens in puberty, and it happens again when we become mothers. And these times are all traditionally very supported by culture. And so when we do it without that support and we just pretend it's not happening, it doesn't work. We end up depressed and lonely and not even knowing who we are and feeling like failures, because we're not being invited into our strength and our status and our new role, and not being celebrated and acknowledged and supported.
Yes, as another rite of passage. And I think that's what makes some of these cultures so different to ours, is because there's a lot more reverence for mothers in this new role. They're elevated and they're seen as somebody that, we should be really treating very well, and we should be gathering around.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the energy of the food. So when I was saying like food's just the beginning, the meals that a mother eats and that are brought to her should be part of that cultural celebration. It shouldn't just be like, put something in the microwave because I'm a bit busy and I need something I can eat with one hand. Obviously there's some practical reality to that. But if you don't also have that as a celebration of your new role and the transition that you're going through, then it's really missing one of the most nutritive elements.
Absolutely. So just on that point, I know that you have a cookbook as well, and you talk from a Ayurvedic perspective about food. What are some of the most helpful foods that I'll cut that out. Some of the most helpful foods that are gentle on her digestive system and that are going to assist with her healing?
Yeah, so there's obviously, you could go a lot into complicated nutrition, but I don't know if that's super helpful for a mum when she's overwhelmed and tired. So I generally try and keep it really simple. We're looking for high calorie foods that have some kind of sentimental value that make you feel good. Usually foods that are like warm and soupy. And so like in traditional cultures around the world, the food that you feed new mothers is often the same food as you would feed people when they're sick. So for example, in my English heritage, it would be chicken soup, would be both the food you bring someone when they're sick. It's the same food as you bring someone when they're becoming a mother. And it's not because becoming a mother is a sickness, but it's because their digestive system is not as strong. You need something that's really feels good and soothing and comforting and familiar. And so, around the world, often what those foods are that are fed to mum is whatever their staple grain is, and then cooked to a really nice soft porridge, like a congee or, so it varies around the world, but the basic principle is like that warm, soupy comfort foods.
Yes. And what would you say about the duration of eating those foods? Because a lot of mums do ask, how long do I eat this way? Can I start changing my diet within 2 or 3 weeks? What would you say?
It's such a non-linear journey. And it's such an individual journey. Some mums don't really have any digestive problems after their baby's born, and they're just like, feed me steak, I'm ready for like food right now. And if your body's asking for that, I think you should listen. But there will be also times when sometimes many months down the track when you return to work and suddenly your demands increase over your capacity again, and you feel the need to sort of withdraw and have a little bit more soothing and comfort. So I would say there's really no end. I mean, this can go on for years, needing to sometimes retreat a little bit. And it usually is a little bit of a delicate dance of like the mums stay at home for a while, get a bit bored, go out a few too many times, get a bit overwhelmed, go, all right, tomorrow I'm just going to have a rest, So, and it's the same with food. It's really just a non-linear journey, and it's probably longer than you want it to be. Everyone wants to kind of like just get back to normal, but we know that doesn't really happen. So it's sort of just listening to your body and allowing yourself permission for this journey to take as long as it takes.
I trust you are enjoying this episode. I know that if you are listening to this podcast, you are likely a woman who deeply cares about her mothering practices. I invite you to sign up to my email list found on my website, motherhoodwithkatura.com.au, for semi-regular emails that include blogs, recipes, and information relating to a variety of motherhood topics. If you are pregnant or know someone who is, head over to my website and sign up to receive your free copy of the postpartum checklist and important contacts list. And so that we can get these conversations out to more mothers, I'd be grateful if you could like, share, and review this podcast. It really does make a difference. Back to the episode. Yeah, I like that. And I also like the fact that, we're getting this message that postpartum is forever, as this podcast is named, and that when you have those moments, it's like anything else that we're growing and developing and evolving with, because it lasts a lifetime and there's always going to be new experiences in our mothering. So there are times where we can give ourselves permission to go back into a little phase of postpartum, if it were, just for comfort and for nourishment and support. I know I did a semi-postpartum. I never really was able to honour my postpartum 20 years ago. And so in the last couple of years, at times I have been chronically unwell. And I thought, I'm going to actually step back, go into my little cocoon, do what makes me feel good. I had a meal service come for a couple of weeks. I had massages for 3 weeks. And it just felt so good. So you can't miss the opportunity, or it's never too late if you haven't been able to really honour that space, because we're always going through new stages of our mothering. So we can do it again and again and again.
Yes, I wanted to like cheer all the way through that, but I didn't want to ruin the audio.
Yeah. And I think another topic, but we'll get there one day, is even in menopause. So
That's it. And when we truly embrace motherhood as the strength that it brings, it is a cultural change for everyone. It gives permission for everyone to listen to their bodies, to move with their cycles, the stages of life, the seasons, it's really shifting the whole society's worldview back into balance, that it's okay to often those female hormones are called rest and digest, all of the oxytocin and things that happen when you have a baby. And if you live in a society that thinks that that's a bad thing, you shouldn't rest and digest, you should always be fight and flight, it's not healthy. You really need to have both. And I think the motherhood is an invitation for us to embrace that, not just for 6 weeks, but for our lives and for our families and for our society.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love that. So why do you think, if we're just going to expand on this topic, why do you think that we've lost touch with our own bodies and our own needs in the Western society? And do you think there will be a time, we hope so, obviously, but what do you think it would take for us to treat postpartum as something, postpartum care and support as something that is necessary to a new mother? How can we shift that?
Yeah, that's such a big question. I don't really know. Um, I often kind of try and think back through history about like when was it that this started, and why is it like this? There's some like anthropological research, and I'm not going to totally remember it, but it's about something to do with the invention of a plow that was some farming machinery that could only be operated by men instead of by women, just because it was big and it required strong upper body strength. And at that moment in time, women became the property of the man, So there's like sort of key moments in time when for some reason or another our societies diverged, and that's only one example, but there's lots all over the world to do with colonization, and witch trials and, lots of different things. But it's not like you can just rewind and pretend that never happened and undo it,
Yeah.
And we've got to kind of work within the society that we're in as well, because the other thing I often talk about is alloparenting, which is anthropologically in hunter-gatherer societies, babies would have had between 8 and 14 adult carers every day. And that's kind of shocking for a mum in our society who's usually the sole carer of her children, and sometimes the dad helps occasionally. If you're really lucky, you have grandparents or someone paid, like childcare or a nanny. But it's not even close to 8 to 14. I mean, there's very few people that would have that who are living, in today's cities. I know there's still some Indigenous people still live that way in Australia, but then they don't get respected for it either. They get into trouble from, child protection, saying like, who's the parents? And it's kind of like, well, we all look after the children. So we really, really don't have a society that's set up to support this. So it's not like we can just flick a switch and turn it back on. But I do think that probably the best place to start is with this individual transformation. It's with accepting in ourselves, in our own postpartum experience, that we need more help and that we want more support, and we want our children to have more help and support, and that we're going to also give more support when we have capacity in our lives, and and we're going to rest when we need to rest and listen to our bodies. And I do really think that starts these ripples that, eventually change kind of the broader social patterns. And it's often really just about, I think, mothers reclaiming that power, that we can do things in the way that feels good and right for us and our families. And then one day there'll be enough of us doing that that we'll be able to storm Parliament and demand better.
It's true, yeah. But I've even heard of community cooking together, mums sharing cooking days, and then everybody gets a meal from it. And of course, the connection with other mothers in such things is also very powerful. But also, just thinking of ways that we can have that ripple effect. So offering to support another mother is pretty likely to be reciprocated. And we can, take turns and looking after one another's children and things like that. And I think maybe that kind of thing, as well as lots and lots of conversations and understanding that this is actually this is not normal, the way that we are doing it in these nuclear families. So it's as you said, it's complex. There's many layers, but we can make small changes just as individuals.
We can, and a lot of it is just letting go of the sort of the shame and the unrealistic expectations and perfectionism and that sort of thing, and just going, like, this is actually reality. This is really how it is.
Yeah, true. So can you give us any sort of things that you've been able to benefit from with your mentors and teachers? What are some of the things that have been very powerful that you've been taught?
Oh, too many to name. There's a lot of people that have been really influential in my career. I started originally studying with Isha Oakes, who's since passed away, but she taught me about Ayurvedic postpartum care. Kirsten Uvnäs Moberg is a big influence on me. She's a Swedish oxytocin researcher. Marion Diamond is a brain scientist who has taught me a lot about plasticity. And Dana Raphael is an anthropologist who introduced me to a lot of the stuff around babies being born and needing lots of adult carers. So yeah, there's so many. I wouldn't even know where to start, but I do love to acknowledge my lineage, because I think that's another thing that we've lost in our society is honoring and respecting the women that came before us and building on that growing knowledge and passing it forward. So yes, there are many people who've had a big influence in my career. That's just a few of them.
Yeah, perhaps you could tell us the quote from Isha Oakes, in case some of the mums haven't heard of her and what she said about the 40 days.
So Isha Oakes, one of her kind of most famous quotes is, "After birth, there is a sacred window of time, a time for complete rejuvenation of a woman's physical, mental, and spiritual health, a time for deep, extended bonding with her newborn. The first 42 days after birth set the stage for her next 42 years." Some people get a bit worried when they hear that quote, because they're like, oh, my postpartum experience was horrific and now I'm stuffed. So I don't think she means it really that way, because I still think postpartum is forever and you can revisit that and embrace that again at any time. It is a very particular biological moment in a woman's life that is a great invitation, but it doesn't mean that you can't increase your oxytocin, increase your brain plasticity and so on at other times throughout your life as well.
Yeah, exactly. So that, I think that quote is, every mother should know that before she goes into it. And maybe then, and as long as you said, we're showing what it actually means, it's not meaning that we're done for the rest of our life if we didn't get our postpartum, but it really just demonstrates how significant the event is and how looking after ourselves in that period of time, it does set us up for good health later on in life and to feel a lot more confident and bonded and attached with our baby as well. So
yes, which has lifelong impacts for our baby as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your postpartums. What were the things that you found really valuable?
Yeah, so my first postpartum experience was very difficult. I had a very difficult birth. It was only a 4-hour labour, a surprise breech baby, and then I had a postpartum hemorrhage that was life-threatening. So it was not a great start. I had to stay in hospital for a long time in the adult special care unit. I was separated from my baby for, the first day or few. And when we finally got home, I was starting from a really long way back. And then what did I learn about that time? The biggest thing I learned was I was relying on my husband and my parents to help, and that was amazing. But because I had studied postpartum care, I thought I already had the professional knowledge and I didn't need to hire someone. But what I didn't realize is that they had all been through that emotional near-death experience alongside me. And they also needed the support of someone impartial, not emotionally involved, to support us all through. So I learned really that having professional help is really, really important, even for someone who already is a professional.
Yeah.
And I think I also learned the importance of peer support as well. I joined after that a peer-supported mental health group it was called Mother Nurture. I'm pretty sure it still runs in Perth. And it's a small group, a mother's circle supported by a psychologist as well as someone who's experienced perinatal mental health challenges. And that was, I just made some lifelong friends. It was the one time a week I could go and talk really frankly about what had happened to me, because sometimes I felt I'd go to a regular mum and they were like complaining that their baby wasn't sleeping, and it felt a little bit difficult to bring up the fact that I was, dealing with my own near-death experience. It just felt I was so out of sync with what other people were going through. So having that peer support group was great. So they were my two big learnings, the peer support and professional support as well. So I kind of expanded my circle. With my second baby, I fell pregnant by surprise. And it was a little bit sooner than I think I would have chosen. But it was okay. And I guess the biggest problem at that stage is we didn't have much money because I had just quit my job, started my business. We didn't have heaps of savings. I hadn't planned the pregnancy, so I hadn't really had time to think about saving up for it. But it was generally a pretty beautiful experience, but it was financially a little bit challenging. I probably had to return to work a little bit sooner than I wanted to. I couldn't pay for all of the professional support that I probably wanted to. But it was still a much more supported experience. And I did have an independent midwife who visited me at home and that sort of thing. So then with my third, I waited a little bit longer and I planned it a little bit better. And I was like, I'm not going to have a baby till I can save up and, really do it the way that I want to do it. And that was a really beautiful postpartum experience, but still also really hard because anyone who's got 3 babies knows that 3 babies is like having 100 children. It's not like it increases in a linear way. It's like exponential. The number of crises in the house and the number of, there's always someone who's pooed their pants and there's always someone who's sick and there's always someone who won't eat their dinner and there's always someone who won't go to bed. So it was just, chaotic life. But I did have so much better support. I had at that time then the resources and the knowledge of what I needed to have a really beautiful experience.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Very different experiences, all 3 of them.
Yes.
But I think you've raised something interesting at the beginning when you said that you, being a professional in the postpartum area, I think that's often what we think is we should know everything and we should be able to get it, to have it all covered because we know what it's all about and we've definitely got the academic knowledge. But when you're in that position yourself of being the mother, you can't do all of those things to yourself. You can't be your support person who listens carefully with no judgment. You can't be the massage therapist that comes over and does some body work on you. It's just not the same when you're trying to do those things for yourself. So it doesn't matter what our background is. I know I've spoken to midwives before that were very disappointed because they weren't able to get the birth that they try to help other mothers to achieve, or lactation consultants who have had really difficult breastfeeding journeys. And sometimes with that comes guilt and frustration because as well you think, well, I should know this. I should be able to do this. But it's a great leveler being a mother. It puts everybody in the same playing field, doesn't it? And we all need support, no matter what our background is, no matter how many people we have in the home or how many relatives we have. An outside person can make all the difference.
Yeah, I absolutely, I really believe that. And I think that was really the catalyst for after my first baby was born, and that experience was what made me go, I have to do this. I have to quit my job and start providing postpartum care because right now there's a woman who's doing this on her own.
Yeah.
And there's no one looking after her. And there's no one who that is their role, is just to be there for her. Like everyone else is also invested in the baby, has their own, opinions and their own experiences that they're bringing to the table. And yes, that was what made me go, like, I've got to take that leap. I can't possibly sleep another night thinking that there's someone out there who could be supported and isn't.
It's beautiful. It really is your soul work.
Yeah, it is. And that's what keeps me going because it's not easy running a business.
No.
It has big ups and downs, but anytime I kind of have a little wobble, I just, get a beautiful email from someone saying that I've changed their life or, that what I've taught them has, made all the difference. And I'm like, okay, I can get up and do this again tomorrow.
Yeah, certainly helpful. So what would you say maybe to a couple of things to a family that says, oh, we can't afford postpartum support?
Yeah, so I mean, there's afford and afford, because some people say they can't afford postpartum support and they've spent $2,000 on a pram. So do you really mean you can't afford it, or do you mean you're not prioritizing it? And if you're not prioritizing it, then really think about your priorities and the lifelong impact of not having support. If you genuinely can't afford it, and that is definitely true for a lot of people right now, uh, then lean on friends and family. And it's going to be tricky because not everyone is going to be up for this transition. By that I mean like the societal transition, because what we're asking for, if people haven't received it themselves, sometimes we'll reject it. So I've worked with a lot of mums who their mum didn't get support. She's like, oh, I don't get all the fuss and bother. Why do you need someone to help you with breastfeeding? I just gave my baby a bottle, you know. So often the people who were not supported themselves become the ones who will be the least supportive. And that's not always true, because some people who weren't supported are like, I never want another person to go through this. But the point is, you can't just ask anyone for this kind of support. You have to really find some like-minded people, and it doesn't take long to figure out who they are. Like once you start having these kinds of conversations, you'll know there's some friends who are up for it and want this change in their lives and in the world. And there's other people who are just not into it. And so don't bother asking for help from them, because it will just lead to frustration and shame, and maybe even making you feel like a failure, because you're like, well, if she can do it, why can't I? So find those right people. And it can be so simple. It can be as simple as having someone to just sit with you and fold laundry together, or walk around Coles with you so they can push the pram and you can push the trolley. Like, and it doesn't even have to be one way help too, because you can both do your shopping. You know, it's just that you're doing it together. So finding people as well, like you were saying, who are happy to share childcare. When my babies were little, I had quite a few friends who we would routinely have each other's children over. And that was so lovely and helpful. But I also knew there were other people who weren't up for it, and you know, their kids would come over for an organized play day every now and then, but I knew they weren't the kind of person I could say, hey, I'm sick, the house is wrecked, do you mind me dropping the kids off for a few hours, you know? And some friends are up for that and some friends aren't. So find those right people.
Yeah. And I think too, like this is something I recommend, is making a huge list of all the people that you think could possibly, even in the smallest ways, help you, and right next to it how you think they might be able to help you. And so that your contact list or your network, it'll show you that it's more generous than maybe you thought it was. And then just ask. And a lot of the time people do want to help. They just don't really know how you might want the help, what they can actually do. But then if, as you said, if someone is not very helpful, don't worry, just tick them off the list, score them off the list and move on. But there will be, you know, somebody that you've met at the park. There'll be somebody you might have met at the library, an older grandmother figure if you don't have that mother sort of role in your life, that would love you to have a cup of tea with you, or would love to just share, you know, some conversations about how she mothered when she was younger. And older people love doing that. So I think there are people out there that we might not have even thought of that could become good support people.
And who might help in ways that we haven't even thought of. Because there are some people who are terrified of cooking, and the idea of going, like, can you bring me a meal? They just be like, oh, no, I can't do that. But they'd be totally happy to walk the dog or take the bins in and out, you know. So, yeah, it's just kind of like thinking of everyone. And I agree. I was surprised. I just put up a post on Facebook. I can't remember, after my third baby was born, I think, with the meal roster. And some of the people who signed up, I was like amazed. There was someone who I went to high school with, who I hadn't seen in years, who dropped over a meal. And then there was like another friend from primary school, her mum signed up to bring me a meal. And I was like, wow, like I never would have thought to ask you, you know, but it was so kind and generous. And sometimes when you do just put it out there like that, it can be surprising how many people are actually open to helping.
Yeah, it can make such a difference, especially if we're sort of in the trajectory where we're feeling quite lonely, or perhaps our mood is starting to spiral a little bit. It's really important to keep some connections,
Yes. And the other thing around that is sometimes it would be my husband that asked for support.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I was at my lowest, it would be quite hard for me to reach out. And I remember one time I had a back injury after my third was born, and it was that chaos time where there's 3 little kids running around, and he had to travel for work and go away for a week, and I was like, I can't even move properly. I don't know how I'm going to cope. And so he, without even really telling me or asking me, just rang a bunch of my friends, and organized this whole week of support. And it was just like amazing. It was so amazing because I didn't even really have the capacity to ask for help at that time. So sometimes it can be easier to have someone else, your partner, your parent, your best friend, to actually help to rally that support as well.
Yeah. And it takes that pressure off that mother if she's not left with that job. And I know myself, I can ask very easily for help for friends of mine. So give it to the person who's going to do a good job. If we're still struggling with, either we can't because we're in some way not even able to get out of bed or walk out the front door, but also if we're just a bit shy about it.
Yeah, that's it. And then also you don't have to hear all the rejections too. You don't know of all the people who didn't sign up for the roster.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. So what do you know now as a mother? I mean, this could be a very long response because it could be heaps and heaps, I'm sure. What do you now know as a mother that you wish that you had known before you became a mother?
Oh, just all the things we've been talking about, really.
Yeah.
But, I always say now it takes a village to raise a mother. And that's what I really wish. And I knew that as an idea, but I didn't really know it. And I didn't really know it to the point where I was prepared to let go of my ego and, my shame and all of that, my fear of rejection and my perfectionism, and actually live that. And I don't know, it's just a journey, isn't it, to do that.
Yeah, it can take time. And now there's a new one about it takes a village to breastfeed. And I'm sure you'd agree with that. I've heard that
totally.
before. And so a lot of the time women are struggling with breastfeeding mostly because they don't have support. Not because
totally. And in our society, we tell people it's biological, or you just can't breastfeed. Your body's broken, your boobs don't work. And that's not true. The vast majority of time, breastfeeding is a learned skill. And if this mother had the right support, not only to learn to breastfeed, but also to make sure she was eating enough and sleeping enough and, all of that kind of thing, then breastfeeding would be a whole lot easier. So it's not an individual fault or problem. It absolutely takes a village.
Yeah. I think it might have been you that said if your mother didn't breastfeed, that she wouldn't be the best person to support you. Is that something I heard from you?
That's some scientific research that shows that, yes, grandmothers who breastfed themselves generally provide better breastfeeding support, even if they don't have technical knowledge of breastfeeding. But there's something we call a confident commitment, and that's one of the best indicators of whether a woman's going to be successfully breastfeed or not. And if you're surrounded by people who are like, of course you can breastfeed, that makes a huge difference. And if you're surrounded by people who are like, oh, it's a bit hard, don't worry about it, just grab a bottle today. But having that confident commitment and being supported by someone who's like, of course you can breastfeed, we'll figure it out, that makes a really big difference.
Yeah, it's a common sense, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So tell us more about your postpartum doula education and care programs, because they are wonderful and I'd love more women to join these. There's quite a few postpartum trainings coming up now, but yours is just incredible. And a lot of it is because you look at it from so many different angles and you keep updated with new issues, new social justice issues or sociology issues. So tell us what you offer.
Yes, so we have a training called Postpartum Education and Care Professional Training, and it's at newbornmothers.com. We've been teaching for 10 years, over 10 years, I think now. And like I said, I started because there was no postpartum training. So I've been doing it for a long time. And yes, I think what is different about my training is how comprehensive it is, because we do look at everything from like food and body work and what probably most people, and practical support, which is what most people think of as postpartum care. But we also look at things like systems change and advocacy and supporting, people with disabilities or, all kinds of different situations, like through grief and loss. And we really, and the reason I cover everything is breastfeeding, mental health, sleep, all of it. The reason I cover everything is I know when I did my doula training, I did about 5 different trainings when I first started as a postpartum doula. And yet I was still constantly shocked to find myself in situations I wasn't prepared for. So the first time I had to help a mother leave a violent relationship, I had no idea what to do. The first time I had a client who had a stillbirth, I had no idea what to do. And I had to learn those things on the go, in the thick of the moment. And I know I didn't do a great job. I did the best I could, but I felt frustrated that my training hadn't prepared me for these things, which are actually very common. Anyone who's a postpartum doula will at some time have to support someone through grief and loss, and will at some time have to support someone who's in a violent relationship. You don't need to have very many clients to find yourself in those situations. So having these broad skills in things like breastfeeding, mental health, sleep, it means that our students are really prepared to get their first client and feel supported in any situation that they might find themselves in.
Yeah, and I can't sort of I'm starting to get a bit doughy in the head. So what do we do? Clap. I will take that out. And that's what I loved about your course. I've been a doula for many years, and I've done other trainings, but they were very limited in the information that they offered. I did not feel equipped to then go out and do this professionally, because I felt like I didn't know enough or wasn't prepared for all these various situations. And I think another amazing thing about your training is the support that comes with it, and it's ongoing. So you have your membership and your Facebook group, and the support is really like second to none. And I know that you use that as a way to, if there's new situations that are coming up in the community, you'll then create a webinar about that to support us. So it really is, if someone is thinking of becoming a postpartum doula because they themselves have had a baby and they've seen how difficult it is, and they've decided that they want to make a difference, then absolutely your training is amazing.
I really appreciate you saying that, because that is something I really love, is, again, providing that support throughout. We've got people in our membership who've been in there for years and still come across situations like, oh, I've got this tricky refund situation, or not sure what to do about my marketing, or someone's, for example, one of the most challenging ones was a child abuse situation, so just knowing that you're not alone when you have to deal with these things, and that you've got a community of professionals. And in our in our educator community alone, we have a midwife, a social worker, breastfeeding educator, as well as myself. So knowing that you've got access to these resources is really important to me, to make sure that we're elevating the quality of care.
Yeah, for sure. What would you say to a mother that might want to get some training in this area, and sort of just thinking about whether that would be a good career change for her, but she's thinking maybe that she doesn't have the time right now, or how's she going to study with her children at home with her?
Yeah.
Is that something that comes up a lot?
It comes up a lot. And I would say I built this business with my own very young children and my own, chaotic mum life. And everything about it has been designed for that. So the whole course is available as audio. You can jump on live calls or pre-submit questions, listen to recordings afterwards. There's so many different ways to engage in the study, and you can do it in your own time, in your own time zone. If you want to study at 3:00 in the morning or on the weekend, you can do that. And most people are surprised at how much they enjoy the course and that they actually want to binge watch it because it's so engaging. They're like, oh, I can't wait to watch the next episode and find out what happens next, you know. And so most of our graduates probably do the course in about, I don't know, say 4 months is the minimum. Some people take maybe more like 10 months. But a lot of the time people have got their first client within the first year after enrolling in the course. It's quite possible that you could start today, in 4 months graduate, put up a website and get a client, you know. So for the thing that frustrates me the most is when people sit on my email list for 2 years thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. I'm like, oh, you could have helped 10 mums by now and you're still just thinking about it. Yeah. So even if you can only spare 2 hours a week, if you know this is what you want to do with your life, just jump in, get started.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. And each recording is quite short. So you've covered everything. You've got mothers in mind that you don't want them to have to listen to an hour.
Yes, that's really important to me.
Yeah.
Most of the lessons are only like 15 to 20 minutes. I do speak quite fast. That's the only feedback I get sometimes from people who speak English as another language. But there's transcripts. So if you want to kind of go through it more thoroughly, you can.
Yeah. No, I sort of think more like you're more efficient and you cut to the point so that we get the information we need from that subject.
Yes, I make sure there's not too many ums and ahs. We get straight to the facts and the things you need to know.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to put all that information in the show notes about your training. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, pearls of wisdom, or what would you like to say to a mother that might be struggling at the moment in her current season of mothering?
I think the main thing is that as women, we're sort of really culturally conditioned to live in a man's world. And it can take a lot of courage and bravery to step into a more feminine role in a sort of confident and powerful way. So whether that's you stepping into motherhood or you stepping into postpartum care, know that these fears that you have are deliberate, that they have purposely been, indoctrinated into you by our culture to hold women back. So if you're having doubts about should I really be asking for help? Would people really pay me to give help? Am I really a failure because I couldn't do this or because I need support to do that? All of those beliefs are designed to keep women small and to stop us from creating this change. So take a little step anyway, and know that this is the only way to overcome them is to get started and take a little bit of action.
I love that. Yeah, very thought-provoking. And we can all make a difference. So yeah, I hope that lands with someone today. So thank you so much for your time. I'm a big fan of you. I've done your programs and I've benefited so much. There is a lot of work out there. There are more and more women reaching out for postpartum support. So I think just jump in if that's something that is calling you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katura.
I hope that you enjoyed this episode and that it offered something helpful to your own mothering experience. If you are a pregnant woman or know someone who is, head over to my website to receive your free copy of the postpartum checklist and contact list. And if you'd like to be better prepared for your postpartum, both practically and mentally, purchase the Peaceful Postpartum ebook, a 52-page interactive guide on what you need to know and what matters most in postpartum. And so that we can get these conversations out to more mothers, I'd be grateful if you could like, share, and review this podcast, and we'll see you next time.